Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Mexican Crossing Lines on KPPP LP 88.1 Fargo Moorhead, adding local color to your airwaves. We're going to have a great show tonight. We'd like you to share this out to people. We're streaming on Facebook at 88.1 Fargo Moorhead, on YouTube at Duke 1517, and on Twitch at a Mexican Crossing Lines.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Join us in our upcoming program. Today we're doing some more TikTok University, some more learning on our own. You can follow us on all our social media platforms at media_PPP on Twitter. You can also email me at cindy@kppfm.com and Duke at kppfm.com. Feel free to leave us a message. You have about 3 minutes in our call-in line at 701-566-0917. Welcome, everyone, to a Mexican Crossing Lines with your host, Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
And you're listening to 88.1 FM KPPP LP Fargo Moorhead, where we are adding local color to your airwaves. And what our mission is at this non-commercial, low-power FM station and across all of our media platforms, it's to inform the public and to create a safe space, a place where people can talk about the tough issues, people can have discussions, and we're not going to be throttled, censored, we're not going to be silenced, we're not going to be tone policed, we're not going to be told we can't have these conversations in the mainstream media, in the consolidated media, in the for-profit media, on those platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, like TikTok, where all of these conversations are going on about silencing, shadow banning, and deplatforming people, a lot of whom have ideas that do not conform to the majority. And when we say we are adding local color to your airwaves, we're talking about marginalized voices. We're adding that spice that you're experiencing in your social media is the spice that comes from those voices that are pushed down, but we uplift them here at 88.1 FM. One of the ways in which we're doing that is we are giving you TikTok University. We have all sorts of topics of the day, and we have no consensus on how we're going to discuss things. We can't even agree upon what we should be teaching in schools.
Yeah, exactly.
People are very upset about the fact that they believe, I don't even know if they believe this, but they say they don't want CRT, critical race theory, taught in their schools.
They don't even know what it is. That's the whole thing. Is one of the biggest reactions that people have when they start trying to ban CRT, is that there's no unified definition of what it is. The legislation and the objections are so vague that it's just basically they're trying to clean house and rewrite history, and they don't want history taught. And it makes white people very uncomfortable. It makes us very uncomfortable to be held accountable for our supremacy and our history in this country. I mean, there's this starting to go, think back to the old days when it was just white people doing things for white people. Well, the world has changed. Everything has changed, and history needs to be taught. And they're basically saying, no, we're not going to teach history, or we're going to do a version of it that's only acceptable to us. And people just go along with it because they're mindless, blindly accepting things that they really they don't know anything about, but they just want to be mad about stuff, so they're going to accept that and push that.
But have you asked yourself why, Duke? Have you asked yourself what is behind this great fear of having American history, of having our history on this continent, on this particular country, piece of land, taught?
Well, white people have not integrated with people of color. They've been separatists. And there's no tools and there's no relationships. Everybody will say, well, I have a Mexican friend or I have a black friend, but do you really? I mean, do you? Do you go to family occasions? When they're sick, do you bring them soup? I mean, do you help care for their parents when they're elderly? I mean, how true is the friendship? Where's the connection?
What's the definition of friendship?
What's the connection between people of color? and white people. In my family, there's none. There had never been none. And people say, oh, yeah, I know people and that stuff. But you look at who people associates with, who they do things with, who they care for, who they're part of each other's lives. It's just the people that are the same as them. The other
So
white people.
one of the reasons is because we live segregated lives, and that's still true today. We pretend that everything has been integrated. We pretend that there is more equality, that there is more diversity, but it's all really for show. And there is a great fear within white folks, if I'm listening correctly to what you just said, that we don't really have those relationships. We don't really, not really, have that integration and that diversity in our lives, in our everyday lives, in all these spaces. And I agree with you 100%. That is one of the reasons. But I think there are more than just that reason. Because what that reason implicates is that we aren't where we think we are as a country in terms of integration, non-segregation. But I think that also speaks to the fact that the things that people claim, the people of color complaining about things that the white people in America don't want to learn about, don't want to be talked about, is still happening now.
Oh, yeah, true.
And I think that there's a question a lot of folks on the white supremacy side of this debate that are supporting bannings of history in America, they would say, what does what happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago have to do with me?
Yeah.
How is this my fault?
How is it your fault? I mean,
As a white person, how are you supposed to do anything about what your ancestors, or maybe not even your ancestors, some other white people's ancestors did here 100 years ago?
You need to learn about it. I mean, it's part of the fabric of what society is today. And you have to go back. And I've heard people say that was 100 years ago. It's like, yeah, that's not that long ago. This country isn't that old. I mean, we don't have that many years since the colonizers came to this continent in 1511. It's not that many years of when it comes to a civilization. And so you have to understand where you've come from, what you've done, because it's all pertinent to where we live and what we do.
Also, as I just pointed out, it's still happening now.
Yeah.
So it isn't something that happened 100 years, 200 years ago, or even 50 years ago. It's happened in my lifetime, my entire lifetime, and it's still happening today.
Exactly.
Okay? We just had 2 mass shootings in 24-hour period from each other, both based on racial hatred, both based on these ideas of supremacy of a certain group of people, right? And what we need to understand is that there is no such idea. There isn't any idea, any campaign out there that is more important than an idea whose time has come. And that's happening. Whether or not white America, the United States, the government, this current administration want to acknowledge it, white America can stay in the past, but the millennials, the young people, the very diverse and growing BIPOC population in America, who, by the way, is educated and can educate themselves through social media, through the library, through the Google, through all of the resources that they can and have educated themselves about things that you all refuse to teach them in the schools. They already have this knowledge. They're already teaching it to their children. They're already spreading it throughout their communities. So you can stand in a silo, you can climb into an ivory tower and pass laws and put a razor wire around your home so that no CRT and no history can penetrate those walls. But it doesn't mean it's not going to permeate this country, and then it's not going to propagate throughout BIPOC communities, because it already has. Too late.
Yep.
Too late. And with that, white people, those who are still out there scared to death that CRT is going to be brought into their schools, that their children are going to be somehow indoctrinated or made to feel bad about themselves. The reality is, all of you, including your children, if you want to rear them that way, will continue to feel bad about yourselves because you're living in the past, because you want to keep people from progressing. You want to keep people from progress. All of the things that are happening right now that there is a pushback against, trans people having rights, women being able to abort and have bodily autonomy, Black and BIPOC people wanting to learn about or having these things standardized and taught, critical race theory, or the history of our country and the racism that has been institutionalized and codified into the law that still affects us today. We can continue to teach those things on our own. We want them to be normalized in society, and we will move forward. You can ask any white woman my age or younger, and they will tell you, hell no, we're not going back. You're not going to take women back to the time where they didn't know where their own vajayjay was or what to do with it, that they didn't have any idea whatsoever of how the birds and the bees, that nobody told women about sexually transmitted diseases. You're not going to take us back to a time where we had no knowledge of any kind of sexuality about our own bodies, to the point where we are easily manipulated, emotionally blackmailed, and controlled into acting against our own interests, so that the male patriarchal supremacist ideologies continue to control and rule over the masses. That's not going to happen. Ask the white women around you. They will tell you, hell to the no. We aren't going back unless you can lobotomize all of the people alive today. They're not going to simply follow you into your silos of non-CRT and pro-life, little fiefdoms. You can go and hide in them.
Oh yeah.
But you're going to be in there alone, because the BIPOC people of today, they're not going backwards to a time where they were uneducated, where it was illegal for them to read and write, where it was illegal for them to be able to keep their children and educate their children, and instead had to have the Catholic Church and the school system and the government come and take their children from them and indoctrinate them and kill the Indian and save the child, and then take them and put them in their Carlisle schools and train them to go and be servants for white folks. No more. No more. No, ma'am. That's not going to happen anymore. We're not going to allow that. There are people like myself who decided that they would rather take their children out of the school and homeschool them, and more BIPOC people are waking up to that today, and they're doing for their own. They're doing for their families. They've decided they're not going to keep sending their kids to a school where a white kid could have a mental imbalance on any given day of the week, bring a pew-pew to school, and all of a sudden we have another mass murder on our hands, most of which are committed by white little boys, and mostly white men are propagating this kind of violence in America. So I want to share some of the TikTok videos that I think speak to the greater needs of a world where we are all educating ourselves. You can go and follow these folks on TikTok. There's a whole bunch of different YouTube channels and Twitter channels, Twitter accounts that I follow that lots of other people are using as platforms to educate themselves in addition to other resources like books and online courses and workshops, etc. This one comes from Eliza Van Court, who is an author and a speaker, and she has her own channel on TikTok called Eliza Van Court. She's a best-selling author of the book A Woman's Guide to Reclaiming Your Space, and she talks a lot about progress for women, for women's rights to speak and to have autonomy over their bodies. And in one of the videos that she was making, she brought in her father to talk about how black and brown people were denied access to one of the greatest uplifting government programs that gave millions of GIs access to loans, to home ownership, to paid for university education, and how that helped white people have an unearned advantage over black and brown people who also served in the military and got no such support. Here is that TikTok. Let's listen.
My dad wanted to talk about the GI Bill when we were doing our post on redlining, so somebody asked the question, so take it away, Dad.
This was brought up in the context of talking about intergenerational wealth and why African Americans have not had a fair shot at accumulating equity the way white people have. In 1944, before the end of World War II, Roosevelt wanted to do something for all the GIs, and it goes without saying that African Americans served with incredible bravery and distinction in World War II. A bill was put in Congress. Unfortunately, Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, who were dead set against doing anything that would benefit African Americans, and who were very strongly in favor of preserving segregation and Jim Crow, stood in the way of allowing African Americans to take advantage of this. This bill was an incredibly important bill. It paid for college education. It paved the way for people to own houses, did all kinds of other stuff for the veterans. What they did with this bill, the Southern Democrats, is that they made sure that the bill would be administered by the states and not by the federal government. In the states, all the southern states could just exclude blacks all they wanted. So the blacks were excluded for the most part. But even in the north, where Levittown was building houses you could buy for $7,000, a black family went in to buy one. They said, no, we won't sell to you. You're an African American, we won't sell to you. And they were just turned away at the door because of color, because of prejudice, because of segregation.
Thank you, Dad. And it's interesting, the whole issue of the states, I just want to put a plug in here. We don't want to throw the power of civil rights to the states, as the Supreme Court has been doing on many issues, because it just doesn't end well, does it?
It does not end well, and it only was when the federal government stepped in, that's when Jim Crow ended across the nation. It was President Johnson, who everybody hated because of the Vietnam War, who was actually a brilliant president, who passed the Civil Rights Bill in 1965, I think it was.
All right, we're running out of time, Dad. We're almost at 3 minutes. It. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, daughter.
So, Duke, they talk about two major issues. The GI Bill, which he covered brilliantly there, and all of the benefits that it gave. And I have to point out, I had an uncle that served in that period of time and was at the Battle of Guadalcanal. I had family members, and it was so traumatic to BIPOC people serving in the U.S. military, how they were treated, especially the glaring differences in how black and brown soldiers were treated on United States soil after coming back from fighting alongside their white counterparts and being feeling more equal and more human when they were fighting and in another country than when they returned home. And redlining was also mentioned there. These are both forms of institutional racism. The redlining on behalf of, banks that wanted to deny people. People don't really think about the ways in which racism was institutionalized in America.
Yeah, there's very, very little knowledge. That's why, studying history and studying subject matter of anti-racism and quote-unquote CRT is to get people tuned in to systemic racism, because most people can only think of individual racism, the way an individual treats another person, but they don't think
right.
about
If you
this.
use the N word,
Yeah.
or if you hang some monkey on a noose, or do something that's overtly racist, and even when we catch people on tape doing things that are overtly racist, the thing they fall back on is that's not who I really am, and meaning that most of the time they're not hurling racial slurs.
Yeah, and it's like they try to excuse their own behavior, but in systemic racism, institutionalized racism, that's something that is much bigger because it's part of the institutions. Now, the community, redlining, in Chicago, some groups stepped up and they tried to change things. They passed a law, federal law, Community Reinvestment Act, which was about getting rid of the redlining, but the corporations and banks just came up with other ways. As much as, like now, you have a right to housing, you can't even rent a place because they can't deny you based on your 7 different categories of human rights, one being of color and race, but they can deny you because of a bad credit report, or they can deny you because you've had police calls. You can, which again is going to have people of color not being able to even get in an apartment and have to live in substandard housing. So as you said, these things are still going on. They've morphed into different methodologies, and they're still going on. When it comes to the GI Bill, in my immediate family, I had an uncle who was in the Air Force. He didn't go and fight in any wars. He was just an Air Force, lifer. And then I had a brother-in-law who joined the Navy and just served a couple years there. But I never heard about the GI Bill. I heard about it from studying history. My CRT training when I was growing up talked about such things that I could learn about. So to deny today's youth any knowledge of, those two issues would leave them in the dark about even how people are getting housing and education.
The redlining and the banks not allowing people to buy homes in certain areas was happening in my lifetime. My father, my family, they wanted to buy homes. They did end up buying 5 different homes in Iowa, and well, actually in the state of Iowa, that would be many more. But in the city of Muscatine, where we were living, we bought 5 homes. We ran one of the first Mexican grocery stores that was run in Muscatine at El Ranchito. And we were only allowed to buy homes in the southern part of town where, incidentally, all of the people of color, all the Mexican people especially, lived. And this is in a county, Muscatine County. It was one of the counties that had the largest Mexican population in the entire state at 30 to 35% Mexican. And by the way, despite the fact that this was such a heavily populated Mexican area, most of the people were kept in poverty by not being given loans to buy. Even that didn't stop my father from buying many homes, but only in a certain part of town where the values of the homes probably did not rise to the level that they did. And many of the homes in the areas where Mexicans were allowed to buy were so close to the river that they frequently flooded and then were lost during one of the many major floods. Right.
And also in Muscatine, the industry, the poisons, the acid rain, those communities are close to those poison areas. And of course, the property value is not going to go up because white people aren't going to buy a home where there's air quality is bad and people are getting thyroid cancer because of it. So
And
that's
you're
another-
sitting right next to an
yeah,
industrial park with all of these
with all the
plumes of
fumes going
smoke.
up. It's called environmental racism. Which is another thing which is historic in this country, which is still happening today. In fact, a lot of the effects are being studied and they've been hidden so long. They're being discovered and talked about.
And at the very same time that we were seeing all of this happen in Muscatine, we had family in Chicago. The laws that they passed in Illinois to try to make it easier for Mexican and black people to buy homes, it had a profound effect. We saw my aunts, my cousins in Chicago buying brownstones, buying really amazing properties, which of course appreciated in value, which allowed them to accumulate wealth. And the difference in our economic success was vastly different. Not because either one of my families in these two states that were adjacent to each other worked harder or tried harder or had access to any better resources. It was only because of their ability to accumulate wealth and work and live in areas that in Muscatine, Iowa, Mexicans weren't allowed to have.
Exactly.
And that always is going to shape. So in addition to talking about why it's important to learn the history, we have to understand that racism isn't just something that you learn from hateful parents and from members of the Klan. No, this is something that is institutionalized into our policies and practices and government that have been going on and are still going on. As you mentioned, they've morphed into something else new. That's always what happens. But the promotion of these ideas still go on. And I want you to think about how those things impact our discussions, knowing about the history of each of these topics, how that impacts our discussions about our rights today.
Yeah.
And one of the things that women are talking about a lot is losing Roe v. Wade and losing body autonomy. And the way that women of color have looked at this topic, because it's been affecting us since the inception of this country, since the colonizers came here and started to enslave us and rape us and force us to give them our children as slaves to work on their haciendas and on their plantations. The difference is that we never had an opportunity to discuss how us not having bodily autonomy affected all women and is still affecting all women. I want you to listen to this next TikToker. This next TikToker is Empress Onyx, and Empress Onyx has a variety of ways that you can support them. Of course, you can follow them on their channel on TikTok at Empress Onyx. That's Empress ONYXX, 2 X's. You can PayPal this person, Venmo, or Cash App them. I'm going to read all of these off to you because I feel that all of these creators need our support. And if the way that you can support them is by following and sharing, that's great. If you can go and support them monetarily so that they can create more content, which we all appreciate, that's another way you can help them too. You can PayPal Empress Onyx at EmpressOnyx1x72 at Gmail. You can Venmo her at Empress Onyx with 1X. Or you can Cash App her at Empress Onyx number 2. Again, 1X number 2. There's only 2 X's in her TikTok title.
Yeah.
Let's take a listen to what she has to say about how BIPOC women and white women experienced bodily autonomy and pregnancy differently.
So I have been researching one of our future discussions, which will be on forced sterilization. Okay, I was doing my research, came across the story of a Latina physician who had gone into the hospital for acute appendicitis, and they sterilized her. Right? She finds out that there are black women and there are Native American women with similar stories. They go in for one thing and they get sterilized. She finds out about the sisters who were sterilized at 12 and 14 because they lied. The hospital lied to the mother and said, "Oh no, you're just consenting, for us to put them on birth control." She learns these things and she wants to end this practice of forced sterilization. So she starts lecturing. She travels the country lecturing, advocating for the end of this practice. And what she learns is she learns this from white women who come up after the lectures complaining because they can't get sterilized. Complaining because they have to wait too long. The wait list is too long for them to get sterilized. That they're flat out told no, right? They have to jump through a ridiculous amount of hoops just to get sterilized. And this physician realized that they made it harder for white women to get sterilized, but they came up with any reason under the sun to sterilize women of color. Now, I want you to think about that story in light of what is most likely going to happen, and that's the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
And I have to say that this topic is very near to my heart because I was sterilized and I was coerced into doing it by a doctor practicing at a Catholic hospital. And they very much deferred to whatever my husband wanted. Since he decided he didn't want any more children, then I was coerced into accepting a tubal ligation that I did not want, which I repeatedly told my doctor, my OBGYN, I did not want. I voiced those words in the terms most clear and most succinct that I could. I said, I do not want anything. I'm willing to take birth control. He should also be willing to take birth control. Part of my bodily autonomy for me is that I do not want my body altered in any permanent way that cannot be reversed, that could impact my ability to reproduce forever. And she insisted. And of course, this was a coercion that happened as I am checking in to have my cesarean section done. Like you are being pressured as you're going in under the knife.
Yeah.
That's got to be some kind of crime.
Yeah.
That should not be allowed.
It's not consent.
When you're in distress, when they've already broken your water, when you have to go in and they're telling you, but your husband doesn't want to have any kids, so I might as well do it while I'm in there.
Yeah.
Because otherwise he's going to have to go and pay thousands of dollars for a vasectomy. You don't want to be selfish, do you? Because it's not covered under insurance. But if I got you open right now, all I got to do is snip, snip, and you're sterilized. And I was in my late 20s.
Wow.
In my 20s. This is unconscionable. I've talked to dozens of white women who have told me that they're in their 40s and their 50s, that they have got reproductive issues within their uterus, issues within their own sexuality, etc., that they want to be sterilized or that they want a hysterectomy, and they have to beg and plead and practically go over the border to find a doctor who will do it because they won't do it here in the United States for the white ladies. They won't do it no matter how much you beg, no matter how much you ask, no matter if you stand on your head. And that has nothing really to do with most discussions about Roe v. Wade. Nobody talks about white women's access to sterilization, to hysterectomies, to, ending, pregnancies for reasons that have nothing to do with rape or incest, because bodily autonomy means we should just have the right to choose what the hell happens with our bodies.
Exactly. Yep.
The baby in the Torah for the Jewish people isn't considered a separate life. It's considered a part of the woman's body. And the priority for the women's health and body is always first.
Yep.
That's where our Bible stuff comes from.
Exactly.
So I don't know how all this got interpreted into a completely different way. But it doesn't really matter, because when we talk about Roe v. Wade, and when we talk about what rights women are going to lose, that's going to look different for women of color, because we've always lacked certain rights and certain bodily autonomy, even as you enjoyed Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
We still lacked the right to access abortions. We still lacked the right to choose. We still were forcibly sterilized. We were coercively sterilized. We were lied to through omission and sterilized. And there are so many stories of women having to go through that, and it's still happening now. What are we doing about those conversations? What are we doing about those problems?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, moving on. I've got one more TikTok university. I think is probably all that we can do in the period of about 45 minutes to an hour to educate the public and to give them some insight into what kinds of things we're looking at on TikTok. The next person I'm going to share with you is the Mark Anthony, 2 Y's at the end, at the Mark Anthony on TikTok. Did a video. Now there's going to be a little bit of swearing on here, so I apologize.
Okay.
You'll have to
I'll get my pen out.
you'll have to get your pen out and beep it out. But this perfectly encompasses the importance of understanding why we need CRT, why we need to go and educate ourselves, even if our schools don't, even if the schools won't, even if the states ban it. Why is it important for us to do it and get it on our own? Well, this particular TikTok, which is for educational purposes, shows really 2 Mexicans who are mixed blood, meaning that the majority of us that survived, the majority of us that are both indigenous and have some European blood in our ancestry because colonization and rape, right? And it is also an acknowledgement that those that survived the colonization are mixed, and that we have an admixture of indigenous, of European, and also a third identify as having African descent in Mexico as well. Which, remember, Mexico imported slaves just like the United States did.
Exactly.
After they murdered all of the people, they had to bring in slaves. So, let's take a look at this TikTok by the Mark Anthony.
Now I get why y'all fight so hard not to teach CRT. Because, baby, not your great-grandparents. More like your parents and your grandparents. Many black and brown people have parents in their immediate home who remember segregation. The first person to desegregate public schools is still very much alive. She even has an Instagram. Many living black people still remember being segregated. My grandfather can show you where the colored water fountains are in his town, and where the black people were allowed and where they weren't. My grandmother distrusts the medical system because she remembers the Tuskegee experiment. She's still alive. If it's our parents and our grandparents, it's surely not y'all fucking great-great-grands. Y'all be lying to yourselves. Nah, better yet, Mama and Peepop be lying to y'all because they don't want y'all to know how fucked up they were. Jim Crow didn't even end until the late 1960s. Those people are still alive. They're in their 40s and 50s. The boomer generation lived through segregation, if you were wondering. So when y'all be trying to make it seem like this is something that happened so long ago, it's not. Your grandparents and your parents are lying to you. But I won't.
So, one of the things that I experience a lot with people my age and even younger is, especially that are conservatives, is they question me about, you've made it. You're exceptional, Cindy. You're running a radio station with your husband. You've got representation for Latino people in the media. You were the editor of a newspaper. You've worked in television, radio, and print. You've done, you've helped co-author a book. You've done a lot of things that we typically don't think of Mexicans as being given access to do, or traditionally they didn't have access to them. So, white folks point to me and other successful BIPOC people as they did to Obama, and say, well, this must mean racism doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
That's the proof right there.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's very naive, too. And I've seen it's usually what's called derailing. It's usually a thing that they're trying to get you a way to deal with the systemic issues and the number of people that are affected by racism and supremacy, and without having access, by showing a few people that made it through. A few. And it's very few compared to the whole population of people of color. And so it's a way for people to divert attention away from the real issue to even talk about it and especially making you personally an example, really, really trying to derail you from the conversation.
And also, those same people, they want to get their stamp of approval from me as a Mexican. I mean, even people in your own family, like,
Oh, yeah.
You don't think I'm a racist, do you?
Yeah.
Is this that I'm doing racist? I mean, I had literally
I'm a good one.
sisters-in-law in my family call me and go, this just happened to me, and I need you to tell me, am I being a racist or am I being a good person? And of course, it never occurred to them that the act of going to the nearest Mexican you could find and asking them to validate you is an act of racism in and of itself. Mm-hmm. The fact that you are so nervous and guilty and afraid, and that you really don't want these discussions to happen, and even just the way in which these discussions are had. You notice a lot of history that we do teach about figures like Malcolm X or Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King are always in black and white when y'all had color at that time. There's lots of pictures, movies, things all in color, but you want to put it in black and white photos. Why is there a tendency to focus on the black and white newspaper photographs from the time period when you all had color television?
Yep.
To give the false sense of things going back further in time before color television existed.
Wow.
To distance yourself from something that not your great-grandparents or your great-great-great-grandparents did, but something that your mama did, something that your daddy did, something that your granny did, something that your cousins and your uncles are still doing right now. And that's the truth. When you try to hide from CRT, when you are going to school board meetings and harassing school administrations and marching in the streets and telling everyone in the world that CRT, you don't know what it is, but CRT, it will not happen in your community. Boy, are you telling on yourselves.
Oh, yeah.
You are showing all of your racist insecurities, and all of us, the educated people of the world, the people that have logical brains, we see you and we can tell what you're hiding from. So keep it tuned to 88.1 FM KPPPLP Fargo Moorhead, where we are adding local color to your airwaves and education, from the CRT to the TikToks to the social medias, right here on your radio dial. Curating information so you don't have to. And come back and listen to us for more educational information from your hosts, Cindy Gomez-Schempp
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
Thank you very much for being with us. Share this message, this programming with all of your friends on all your pages and social media. And we'll see you here next time. Have a great evening. Good night.